You know, let me say this today about the word that just came forth before I give you these prophetic words. Of course, the whole Bible is prophetic because it all has the potential to come to pass. So every bit of it is prophetic, is God-breathed in every way. Now, when you look over here at 2 Kings, we find out that Elijah is about to be caught away in 2 Kings 2. And it came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. Now Gilgal is the home of the prophets. And at this moment, at this point in time, the government had beat the faith out of people. The government had beat the faith out of people, especially Jezebel, Ahab and Jezebel. And they had just beat the people to the point where they did not believe the Lord's prophets. And they stood by while Jezebel had the prophets murdered. She had them killed. She drove them off the scene. She drove them into hiding. Some prophets became afraid to speak any longer. Some hid themselves in caves. And Obadiah fed them with bread and so forth, using government money to do it. And so he would borrow the money and feed them. And so this turned out to be the woman with the miracle of the oil. This was his wife. And so we see this in these things in the Scripture. And so we're in a time when government and manufactured things have beat the faith out of people to believe in the supernatural. But all the time, the enemy is trying to open a door to bring evil spirits and demonic entities into this earth, because it caught the church weak. Now, let me say something here that people will say things like this. Well, we're in a great awakening, and the virus and all of that brought about the great awakening of the church. Now, see, that's what I'm talking about. The church has given credit to a sickness that they say a sickness woke the church up. There's nothing to back this up. It's the Word, it's God Himself that wakes the church up. It's the bridegroom comes and the church has to have their lamps trimmed and ready. Everything has to be ready for a visitation of the bridegroom. And so what happened is the church had become so weak and had the faith beat out of it. Now, he would say, well, now I'm going to lay some heavy stuff out here. He would say, well, how is that, Brother Robin? How is that? Well, churches got in debt to government. They got in debt with their churches, their buildings, everything, until they couldn't focus on the coming revival, and all they could focus on was trying to get their debt relief. Just trying to get relieved of debt, and without realizing it, the governments were controlling every move they made. And so now we're looking at a parallel time when there is the government has beat the faith out of the people. They've driven them from the Word. They've given them so much disinformation. And when it came time, they thought they had the church weak enough. Somebody, very unscrupulous, people say, well, how do you know it was an unscrupulous person that really did this? How come we don't know it's natural? I remember in 2019, April the 30th, standing right here, the Lord told me there was a plague coming, a sickness, a pestilence. And unscrupulous people would take advantage of this, that it would come. And what you're looking at is something manufactured by government. And they took advantage of it. And they began to manipulate the people. And manipulate them to the point now when people are going to be tested and so forth, they're saying now, well, this is not showing up so much now. It's just the flu. Just the flu showing up. Really? Well, you know, the flu disappeared when that was being shown up. Now suddenly it's back and that goes away. You know, it's just like somebody walked into a room and the odor filled the room so bad with a stink or a stench, and you were just going, whoa, whoa, and then the smell left when they left. It's not hard to figure out who brought it. When this came on the scene, the flu went away, and when the flu came back, this went away. Well, that ought to tell you something, but you've got a bunch of snake-eyed people trying to manipulate with jabs and masks and all this kind of stuff until they beat the faith out of the people. And the people can't believe. They don't believe. And then when you had God's very own prophets back up and just start apologizing, then that sure added to it. Now, it says it came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said unto Elisha, Tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord hath sent me to Bethel. And Elisha said unto him, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they went down to Bethel. And the sons of the prophets that were at Bethel came forth to Elisha and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And he said, Yea, I know it, hold ye your peace. Now these were prophets that used to be under Elijah's teaching. They were sons of the prophets. They were students of Elijah's schools. But now they had redefined the office of a prophet. And they got down, you'll see when it got down to it, they could only believe what they saw and what they heard. They could not believe anything supernatural. But see, when the church gets lulled into a position where they can't believe the supernatural, but the whole time the enemy believes in the world of the Spirit, but he talks the church out of believing in it, and the church falls into a carnal state, dealing with only what their five physical senses, then he can bring about a plan that no one can stop and no one can see coming. I'm going to say something that I don't have a lot of things to show you today, because to show you this, but there is a book that I wrote that I have never been led to put out really and talk about a lot. It's out, but not to talk about, until a week ago. And now the Lord says it's time to begin to talk about it. It's called The Pool and the Portal. And I would encourage you to get that book and look at that book. It's written in a fiction type setting, but I want you to look at it and let your spirit do the studying as you read through it. It's easy to read. It's only about that thick. It's not very long. But there's information in it that will prepare you for what's happening. I'm going to go ahead and say this. In 2015, and I'm just going to throw this out there like this, there was a portal that tried to open. In 2015, government people tried to open it. There was and nations are involved in this. Now, not everyone, just certain leaders. It's hard for people to believe that everything is a scripted plan. You know, it was like when Trump was running for the second term. There was people like George Soros that had what was called a fight back table. And a lot of people may not even know this. But he brought people, all kinds of key people, and they did war games and worked out every single scenario that could possibly happen through that campaign. And they were traitors from the Republicans, went to that fight back table. and they sold out their president. They all went there, and not all of them, but a lot of them, and they gathered around this table, and they played war games. Now, why you play war games is so that you can gain revelation of what could be thought of as situations unfold. That's why the military trains in war games. It's so that they can get an idea. They'll divide up teams, and they'll want to play the enemy, want to play them, and they'll develop strategies. And they'll figure out what the enemy's going to do and be prepared for it before it happens. So George Soros had this fight back table. He paid big money to have everybody come. And if you could go back and study what he did and what the conclusions they came to, it happened and played out almost exactly the way they had covered it. This was a planned thing. Now, in 2000, I know this is going to sound wild, but you know, prophets sometimes sound wild. And I might as well start talking about it. In 2008 and 9, a plan was developed. And a portal was opened to bring a spirit from the time, this just sounds too wild, from the time of the tribulation back into that time. And the leader of the nation at that time began to act just like the Antichrist, just like Satan, just like him. Every attribute, every move, every decision, everything, it's because a spirit was dimensions were manipulated to bring it there. People say, I don't even believe that. Then tell me something. What is CERN even doing? If they're not opening dimensions, what is it? Did you happen to see the whole play where they displayed their vision in front of world leaders in Switzerland? They put a whole play together, a whole dramatized play, and men in nice suits and women dressed to the nines. They all came and sat in the stands like they had some kind of holy dignitary about their countenance. And when all they were sitting and watching was the workers of CERN marched up out of the pit of hell and walked onto a level playing board, like a chess type board, I guess. It was just a solid flat surface. And they came out there with their working uniforms, their orange jumpsuits, their hard hats, and they marched like zombies up out of hell. And they stood on that floor, and then suddenly they started simulating a wild orgy in front of everybody. And the dignitaries with their suits and ties that had clean soaped wash hands and filthy maggot infested hearts stood there and watched them as they did this. And some of their other workers climbed up the wall in this dramatization and began to break through a glass wall, trying to go through a dimension. And when they finally finished it with their rituals of uncleanness and their science of breaking through, and it cost lives during the dramatization, but when it was all over and you combined it all together, Baphomet, the goat man, came walking out of the portal and walked out onto the field and laid down among the wild orgy that was going on and looked at him. And that was the end of the dramatization. And soap-washed hands and infested dirty hearts stood up and applauded. Why would you put on such a play if you're not looking to bring something from another dimension? And so this was happening. And they gave their vision. Even people who weren't saved, when they saw that, commented and said, this is straight up satanic. They knew exactly what it was. And they showed their purpose. They say, we're hunting the God particle. Really? Yeah. We want to know where we came from. We'll find the particle of life. Yeah? And then when they begin to fire that giant collider up, that big hadron collider, and it began to open another dimension, hideous faces appeared on the other side. And they showed in that dramatization what they were intending to do. And one of the scientists said this, said, if we could open another dimension, something might step through it. They wanted to step through. But they wasn't counting on a bunch of prophets that in an undisclosed location shut it down. I know them. And so we look at things like that. And it was planned, and when that spirit was brought back to align things, to speed up time, and bring us into a time we wasn't prepared for. Then 2015 came along. And when 2015, I'm just going to jump around because the Lord is just directing me here. And in 2015, it was supposed to open. April 23rd, I believe it was. It was supposed to open. They were supposed to open another dimension. It fired up. The power of it began to move, and it's built over the temple of Apollo. Apollo. We should understand when we hear a name like that, Apollo. Let me look.